Hi everyone. I welcome you on my channel, English. Today you are going to watch the video of English. I am sure that you will like this video. Watch the full video and don't forget to like and subscribe this channel and share this video to the other students, so that they also may get the benefits of it. Thank you very much. Now enjoy the video.
Let's have a look at the overview of the chapter. The Portrait of a Lady is part of an autobiography by Khushwant Singh. In this story, the author draws a pen portrait of his grandmother. He beautifully describes their relationship and how it undergoes several changes. In other words, the story is a loving tribute from a grandson to his grandmother. The story gives a picture of human relationships. It is a realistic account of how the grandparents give all their time, attention and love to their grandchildren. Now let's have a view on the main characters of this chapter. Khushwant Singh. The author, he recounts his childhood days and his relationship with his grandmother. The main character of the chapter is grandmother. Khushwant Singh's grandmother is described as an extremely religious person. She was a very kind lady. She was short, fat and slightly bent. Her face was wrinkled, and she was always dressed in spotless white clothes. In the village, she took care of all the needs of the author when he was a child. Now let's start the story. The author recalls his grandmother as a very old lady. For the 20 years that the author had known his grandmother, he had found her old and wrinkled. It was hard for him to believe that she had once been young and pretty and she had a husband. The author's grandfather's portrait hung on the wall of the drawing room. He wore a big turban. His clothes were loose. He looked at least 100 years old. Looking at his portrait, no one could imagine him that in his youth he had a wife and children. The thought of the grandmother being young and pretty was almost revolting to him. Nobody could say by seeing her that she was pretty and young in her time. She was short, fat and slightly bent in stature. Her face was a crisscross of wrinkles. Her silvery white hair was scattered over her wrinkled face. The author remembered her moving around the house in spotless white clothes, with one hand resting on her waist to balance her stoop, and the other hand counting the beads of her rosary. Her lips moved constantly in inaudible prayer to the author. She could never have been pretty, but she reflected a divine beauty. She was beautiful from my mind and from her soul. The author and his grandmother were good friends. His parents left him to stay with her. When they shifted to the city, in the village, his grandmother took care of all his needs. She was quite active and fast. She used to wake him up in the morning and get him ready for school. She bathed and dressed him. Then she would fetch his wooden slate, which she had already washed and plastered with yellow chalk. She would take an earthen inkpot and a red pen and tie them in a bundle and handed it all to author. After having a thick, stale chapati with a little butter and sugar spread on it for breakfast, they used to leave for school. The author's grandmother always accompanied him to the school, because it was attached to the temple, where she used to pray. The priest taught children the alphabet and the morning prayer. The children sat into rows in the veranda. They would sing the alphabet or the prayer in a chorus, while the author learnt his lessons at school. The grandmother would read scriptures in the adjoining temple. On their way they would feed stale chapatis to the dogs. The turning point came in their relationship when they moved to the city to stay with the author's parents. In the city, the author went to an English school in a motor bus. The grandmother could not go with him to the school, as there were no dogs in the streets. So the grandmother started feeding the sparrows. As the years rolled by, they saw less of each other. In spite of her immense interest in his studies, she could not help him in his lessons, because he was learning English, the law of gravity, Archimedes' principle, and many more such things, which she could not understand, and this made her unhappy. Sometimes she would ask him what the teacher had taught him. Grandmother didn't believe in the things taught at the English school. She was distressed to learn that there was no teaching about God and the scriptures in the school. Moreover, she was very disturbed at the idea of music lessons being given at the English school to her. Music had lewd associations, or the music was for the people of low society, and she considered music was not good for gentlefolk or high society people. The common link of friendship between the author and the grandmother broke when the author started going to the university and was given a room of his own. The grandmother accepted her loneliness, and now she rarely spoke to anyone all day long. She sat spinning the wheel and reciting her prayers. Only in the afternoon she relaxed for a while to feed the sparrows. They perched on her shoulders, and some even on her head, but she never shooed them away. It used to be the happiest half hour of the day for her. The author decided to go abroad for higher studies for 5 years. He was sure that his grandmother would be upset at his departure, but she was not even sentimental. She came to the railway station to see him off. She showed no emotion. She was absorbed in praying and counting the beads of her rosary silently. She kissed his forehead. The author thought that perhaps it was the last sign of physical contact between them. After 5 years, the author found his grandmother at the station. When he returned, she held him in her arms. He found her more religious and better. He could hear her reciting prayers. Even that day, the happiest moment for her was feeding the sparrows. Herself, however, something strange happened to her in the evening. For the first time ever, she did not pray. Instead, she collected the women of the neighborhood, got an old drum and started singing songs of the homecoming of warriors. They tried to persuade her to stop to avoid overstraining herself, but she didn't listen. She fell ill the next morning. The grandmother was diagnosed with a mild fever by the doctor, but she insisted that her end was near. She told everyone that she did not want to talk to anyone and would rather spend her last moments praying. She ignored everyone's protests and started counting the beads in her rosary while praying. After a short while, the author noticed that his grandmother's lips stopped moving and the rosary fell from her lifeless fingers. She died a peaceful death. She was covered with a red shawl. When the author and others came to take away the grandmother's body, they met a strange sight. To mourn her death, a lot of sparrows had surrounded her body. They were all silent. When the author's mother offered the sparrows some bread, they refused to eat and quietly flew away after the grandmother's body was carried away for the last funeral process. Now let's revise the main points of the chapter. When the author, Khushwant Singh, was a little child, his parents left him in the village with his grandmother and went to live in the city. The author's grandmother was an old lady. She was very religious. The author shared a very close bond with his grandmother. The grandmother woke him up, dressed him and accompanied him to school. The school was attached to the temple. While the author was at school, the grandmother used to read the scriptures in the temple. When the author's parents had settled down, he and his grandmother also went to the city. It proved a turning point in their friendship. In the city, Khushwant Singh attended an English school and traveled in a motor bus. He learned English words and topics of Western science. The grandmother could no longer accompany him to his school nor help him in his studies. However, they shared the same room. When the author started going to the university, he was given a separate room. Thus, the last link of their friendship was broken. The grandmother kept herself busy in her prayers and spinning the wheel. Her favorite part of the day was feeding the sparrows. When the author went abroad for higher studies, their grandmother came to see him off at the station, but she showed no emotions and was not even sentimental. The author came back after 5 years and was received by his grandmother at the station. She was unchanged and did not look a day older. In the evening, the grandmother did not pray and instead collected the women of the neighborhood and celebrated her grandson's homecoming. The grandmother fell ill the next day and she knew that her end was near. She stopped talking and closed her eyes. She was lost in her prayers and counting the beads of her rosary. Suddenly, the rosary fell down and her lips stopped moving. She was dead. Thousands of sparrows assembled in the room and sat quietly to mourn her death. They did not even eat the crumbs given by the author's mother. After the grandmother's body was taken for cremation, the sparrows flew away silently.
Dear students, I hope you must have liked this video. If you like this, please like and share the video, and subscribe the channel. We will meet again in the next video. Till then, goodbye and take care of yourself.